Do you have blind spots? What if your biggest blind spot could become your greatest strength? Our speaker today knows about blind spots. His resulted in brain surgery. It changed him so much that he wrote the book entitled, Sometimes It Does Take a Brain Surgeon. He grew up on a tomato farm in Northwest Ohio as the youngest of 10 kids. A former IT salesman, Brian is now a speaker and author while working at the Ohio State School for the Blind. He has a clear focus. It is to help others identify and move beyond their blind spots. You could say he's on a mission. Since his brain surgery in 2011, Brian has given a TED Talk, published a book, and ran a half marathon, all as part of his effort to inspire others. Brian is here today to share ideas that will help us move beyond our own blind spots without the need for brain surgery. Please join me in welcoming Brian Wagner.
What sets you apart? What makes you different from everyone else? On March 4th, 2011, I woke up and I couldn't see. I stumbled my way to the restroom, and when I got there, I flipped on the light switch. It was still dark. When I turned towards the mirror and I looked, I could see there was a light coming from the bottom of my slit in my eyes. So the power was on. But when I looked towards the mirror, I couldn't see anything. My face was swollen. My whole face was swollen. I couldn't see. At that moment, my entire life changed. I thought my life was over. I was blind. Connie heard the commotion, and she came downstairs. Brian! What happened? I don't know. As soon as we were able to, we went to the ER. And we spent hours and hours of tests and hours of waiting. And then finally the doctor came in. And he said, Mr. Wagner, it appears as though one of the cavernous malformations has bled. And it's bled and it's putting pressure on the nerves that control your vision. We're recommending that you have brain surgery. Brain surgery? Brain surgery? They told me never to let someone operate on my brainstem. What's changed? The problems you have are only going to become worse and more frequent. Worse and more frequent. Worse and more frequent. So time out. Ever since I was 10 years old, I've had problems with my brain. Well, back in 1977 as a 10-year-old boy, so yes, that makes me 54, I've had issues. It's hard to have your whole life dashed before you when you're 10 years old. You know, I'll never forget my mom coming out when I was 10. She was running and she said, Brian, I've got something for you. It's the registration for the Elmwood Royals football camp. You've always wanted to play football, and you've always wanted to be an Elmwood Royal. This is your chance. Mom was a little more excited than I was. But I was excited. I got to play football with my friends. That's everything I ever wanted to do. Man, it was awesome. But on the third day of football camp, I blacked out. I don't remember anything after that. But I had what's called a hydrocephalus. That's cephalus, not syphilis. I was 10. But that syphilis caused me to have a buildup of fluid on my brain. And I ended up having a shunt put into my head that drains fluid from my brain to my abdomen. It's a shunt that I have even until this day. It's really hard to have your dreams dashed early on. I mean, I thought I was going to be Bart Starr or Terry Bradshaw or Fran Tarkenton. No, those days are gone. So come back with me. Come back to the ER. Oh, but first I want to tell you this story. A story of how I was with my grandma after I'd had this hydrocephalus and I had the shunt put in. Well, at grandma's house, we talked, and I asked grandma how she was doing, because that was what I was supposed to do. But she asked me how I was doing. And I started to lay this sob story on her about how, I wasn't able to play football anymore, and this and that and the other thing. She said, Brian, and she laid some real sage grandma advice on me. She said, Brian, life is going to turn out differently than you planned. Don't be afraid to reimagine your life. Always be open to reimagining your life. Just find what makes you unique and use that to make someone else's life better. I gotta admit, I didn't know what to do with that information at the time, but it served me well. So let me ask you, who did you want to be when you grew up? Tell me about it in the chat box. I'll wait 30 seconds and then we'll come back. So we've got about 30 seconds and we're going to come back as soon as this time is up. But tell me a little bit. Oh, I see there's lots of responses coming in. I love that. There's so many people that really identify with that person they wanted to be when they grew up. Who was it for you? Tell me. We've got another 10 seconds and then we'll go on from there. Well, thank you very much for all the responses. This has been awesome. And we're at time. So, back to the ER, where I was before. Worse and more frequent. I was blind, and the problems were only going to get worse. What to do? Well, they said that there's really only one doctor that we recommend you go see. There's just one specialist, and he's in Phoenix. So on April 1st, no fooling, I was flown to Phoenix, Arizona to have brain surgery by the one. Who is that one for you? Different times in your life, there's one person. There's one that's a coach, a mentor, a teacher, a spouse, a brother or sister, mom or dad. There was that one person that helped you get over a hump, or it helped you get through an obstacle, or helped you get to something much better than where you were before. Who was that for you? Keep that person in mind right now. Thank you. So that was my one. There's so much to say about that one. But it's hard to have your dreams dashed early on, like I said. And I'll tell you that there's a lot that we can all learn from this. All learn from what I've gone through and what other people have gone through as well. In the moment, it seemed to take forever. In reality, it was gone in the blink of an eye. Have you ever had something like that where you're just full of anxiety and torment? You torment yourself, and then when the moment comes and goes, you wonder where it went? Well, obviously my life turned out different than I had planned. When something tragic happens in our lives, it's really tough, or it's really easy to get stuck in the woe is me. But we'll be much better served if we don't stay there. Yes, we can go there at a time, but not stay there. That's my story of how I went into that spot, and then it came out real quick. I had a lot of encouragers around me during this time. My wife was one of the biggest encouragers. She encouraged me to go for walks. Now, I had no idea she wanted me to go down treacherous terrain. That's hard for me to say. Treacherous terrain. But that's what she wanted me to do. I mean, there were ledges on the left and ledges on the right. And then there was those undulations. Undulations. Isn't that just a fun word to say? But those undulations changed when I went down that sidewalk the other way. Much like in your jobs, everything changes when you take the other person's perspective. When you come at the problem or issue or whatever it is from their perspective, your whole world changes. That's why it's so important for us all to understand that perspective that we have. You know, I had a number of other encouragers in my life. One of them was my 13-year-old daughter, Jess. That Father's Day, she wrote me a Father's Day letter. It's pretty special, and I'd like to read it to you. Dear Dad, Happy Dad's Day. I hope you have a great day because you definitely deserve it. All the cards and TV commercials always say, "My dad's the best." But they're all lying. You're the best ever. Sure, other people's dads are great. They're younger than you, they're sportier, and they're funner. But you've got something that they don't have. Bravery. Even after everything you've been through, you still get out of bed in the morning. You still joke around and play with us and cook on the grill, even though you only have half of one good eye. But you do more still. You teach me that even though you go through the toughest, most grueling things, if you just believe that God is right there with you through everything. Believe that everything turns out okay in the end. Believe that sometimes the only thing you can do is hope, beyond hope. Then maybe you'll make it out alive. Not always unscathed, but alive. And giving me that hope, that sense of belief, well, I'd take that over a dad with two good eyes any day. Love, 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 love. Jess. When's the last time you received a letter like that? I got a better question. When's the last time you wrote a letter like that? Well, remember that one that we just talked about? That one person for you, whoever it was. I want you to write a letter like that for them today. That letter is going to change their lives. But you know what's more than that? It's going to change your life forever. Because you're going to become an encourager. An encourager for encouragers. And we're going to make more encouragers all the way around. I'm so happy for you. I'm so glad you're doing this with me. So tell me in the chat box, who is your biggest encourager? I'll give you 30 seconds and we'll go on. So let's see. There's our time. So tell me, if it was your mom or dad, that's great. I love to hear that. If it was a grandma or grandpa, that's also great. Anybody that you served as an encourager for you, I'd love to hear about it. Thank you. We've got another 10 seconds, so keep them coming in. I love to see this. This is phenomenal. Thank you so much. People ask me all the time, Brian, how do you stay so positive? Well, it's not easy. It's not always easy, but when the pandemic hit back in March of 2020, it was really hard. So what I had to do in March of 2020, I had to go back and I had to think about how I stayed positive back in 2011 when all this was going on with me. Well, so there are some certain ways that I do that, how I stay positive. And that's important for us all to understand because there are certain ways you can do this. You can do it too. For me, during the pandemic, I had to turn off the news. Now, some of the news that's out there, it's very, very important. And I want to stay on top of that. But there's also a lot of news out there that's not as important. I don't need to be caught up with that every day. So I turned it off. That allowed me to have more sanity. And then focus on what brings you joy. A friend of mine told me about this practice one time, and I just loved the idea. She actually writes down a list of what brings her joy. So when she's in those moments of depression or just not having a good day, she goes back to that list and she pulls out one or two of those things and she does that. So for me, I made a list, and the list included things like taking a nap. Yes, I love to take my naps. What else? I focus on when I focus on bringing me joy. With joy comes from building a fire, and building a fire out in the fire pit and just staring at it, that brings me joy. Talking about my dad brings me joy. Now, what is it for you? You don't have to tell me about it, but just keep in mind that if you can make a list like that, you'll be able to have that relief as well. Another way that I stay positive is I call someone for them. Now, I call my mom every day, and we have great conversations, but there's other times where I need to call someone else for them. Think about somebody in your life that you have a relationship with that, you maybe not have talked to in a while, and you just call them to find out how they're doing. So that's important for us all to understand how great that is. So the next step is to go from positive to being awesome. How do you go from being positive, which is good, to being awesome? Well, first of all, know yourself. Know who you are. What makes you unique, like I asked you earlier. That's important. And then build on your strengths. In the performance reviews that we have, and yes, I realize that all the HR managers out there probably will, I won't even say it. But in the performance reviews, we have a moment where we have a good thing that someone does and we have another good thing that someone does, and we kind of sandwich that between something that they need to work on. And we encourage them to work on that one thing. What if we took a different approach? What if we looked at it from an aspect of, maybe they don't need to work on that one thing. Maybe they need to work on building their strengths and then allow them to have someone else on the team fill in that gap, fill in that one spot where they're not as strong, and not spend so much time working on something that they're never going to be good at or never going to be great at. The next thing to become awesome is to talk nicely to yourself. How do you talk nicely to yourself? Now, there are too many times we all have this occurrence where we'll say things like, "Oh, you're so dumb. I can't believe you said that. What are you thinking? Oh, where'd you leave your keys? You left your keys again? How come?" So when you say negative things like that about yourself, those words come out when you talk about someone else. You don't want that. The last way to be awesome is to share your awesomeness with someone else. That is a great way to be awesome. So what we do is we tell people how good we are. It doesn't mean we brag, but we tell them what we're doing well. So tell me, who here is ready to share your awesomeness with the world? That's what I would love for you to do. Tell me about it in the chat box. I'll give you 30 seconds, and then we're going to move on. This all made me think of my blind spots. When going through this process, blind spot is something that is preventing you from seeing something you should be seeing. So when I'm driving, which, yes, it doesn't happen very often anymore. When I'm driving, I have a deal with the person in the passenger seat. They see my blind spots. They see what I don't see. So who do you have that sees your blind spots? We all have them. We all have them. So I want to encourage you to find someone that helps you with your blind spots. At Radical Vision, we help people to embrace their own personal blindness, those own personal blind spots, to achieve a greater vision for their lives. Now, I told you, or you heard that I was from a large family. And you know that being the youngest of 10 kids, you usually get a lot of nicknames. So I have plenty of them from when I was growing up. And you also know that I was in IT sales. So in IT sales, I got another nickname. And that nickname was Buy It Back Brian. Now, I don't know if that was really a good nickname, but it's one that they gave me. Well, anyway, so, Buy It Back Brian went out on sales calls. And in sales, typically there would be a sales guy, the numbers guy, and that's me. And then there would also be the smart guy or smart gal, whomever, and he or she would really know all the bits and bytes. We went into one account and walked up to the guard shack and said hello and talked to the nice lady there. She was all dressed in her security guard outfit. And she said, well, hi, how are you? And we exchanged pleasantries as well, which was very nice. And she said, who are you here to see? I said, well, we're here to see Bill. I said, okay. And then so she grabbed her Sharpie and she noted her head down to make out a name tag for me. And not looking up, she said, what's your name? And I said, my name's Brian. Not going by a nickname at this point. She said, well, how do you spell that? My name's Brian, with one I. I looked around, and smart guy was doubled over. I'm like, what are you doing? He's like, Brian with one eye. That's hilarious. So from my perspective, I kind of forgot about my disability, having one eye. But I realized at that point, that's who I was. I'm Brian with one eye. Who are you? What role have you stepped into that's different from where you've been before? That you need to accept that. You need to know that people are looking to you for help. So what position have you changed to? All those things are important for us all to understand. Understand who we are. Yes, I do have the URL. brianwith1i.com. And you can spell it either way if you want. Brian with an I-E-Y-E or Brian with one I. Anyway, thank you so much for indulging me with that. You know, there's another guy that knows a lot about vision, and that was my dad. You know, my dad and I had a lot in common. A lot of people said we had a smile that was similar. There was also this boyish optimism or unbridled optimism. Some call it oblivious optimism, but I didn't like that word, so I settled for unbridled optimism. Well, no matter where we'd go, we'd always have a good time. So whether it was a birthday party or a graduation or even a funeral. I'll never forget the time my dad bought the farm. I'm sorry, not the time he bought the farm, and he eventually did, but the time he bought a farm. He went to town and went to the attorney's office where they were having this silent auction, and he was going to listen in. I'm not really sure how you listen into a silent auction, but that's what he was going to do. Anyway, he was listening in, and he heard all the comments, and talked to the other guys there, and he loved this ground that was being sold. It was about 150 acres. It was the old Lemmerbach farm, and the old Lemmerbach farm was very good soil. Well, Dad put in his bid, and when he did, he won. He won, and everybody there walked out shaking their heads like, wow, how did you do that? So on the way home, my dad had to think of how he was going to tell Mary Jo, my mom, about this ground he had bought. I'll never forget my mom sitting on the 5-gallon bucket in the middle of the utility room with her head in her hands. Wally! How are we going to do this? How are we ever going to pay this money back? Yes, my dad's name is Wally Wagner. People like that name. But my mom grew up in the Depression era. She was born in 1929. And, my grandpa Hubert, who they also call Hootie, Grandpa Hootie, love that name. Another great name. And so Grandpa Hootie, he never had debt. He wouldn't have any credit card debt or anything like that, even at all. So this whole debt concept was foreign to my mom until my dad came home with debt bigger than anyone could imagine. Well, that ground ended up being the best ground that we've had in our family, and it's still in our family to this day. But that oblivious optimism, that unbridled optimism that my dad had proved to be so beneficial to him and so beneficial to us as a family, because that allowed us to grow beyond what we thought we would grow. I told you I had a lot of encouragers. This is my family, and they always encourage me. During these first few years after having brain surgery, I was very hesitant to step in front of a camera. I didn't want them to, record where I was because I didn't want to stay there. I thought it was temporary. I don't know what I thought, but I didn't want to accept that this has happened. So we have these pictures taken every year around Christmas time, and we put them in the cards or send them out. But I said this one year, I said, wouldn't it be nice if I wasn't the only one winking in this picture? I said, would you all wink with me? And they said, sure, Dad. Or maybe it was, sure, Dad. Whatever, they did it. They winked with me. And this is the picture. Now, some of them are better winkers than others. You can see that. But that got me thinking, what is it that I have that I can do, or how can I see myself as the person with one eye. This got me thinking. And as I started to think, I'm like, I can use that. So I became aware. I became aware of this situation and I accepted it. As I became aware of it, I began to understand that I could use that as a lever. And that's what I'm encouraging you all to do, is to encourage others to have that lever that they can use with what makes them unique. So encourage the people you manage, encourage your employees to know what makes them unique and find that lever that they can use to make someone else's life better. You know, when I did this with the winking, that was one thing. But then I just flat out asked people for rides. You know, I have to, because back in I told you about my situation in March of 2011, but then in November of 2020, yes, 2020, that lovely year, I had another brain bleed. And that brain bleed caused me to have a speech impediment. My entire right side of my face is numb. I have a tongue that's numb most of the time. I'm able to taste some things, but my face is all prickly right now. And then my right eye obviously doesn't open. But then the entire right side of my body has numbness all throughout it. So when I told people about my situation, I asked them for rides. They were like, oh, yeah, sure. Of course, we'll give you a ride. And they enjoyed it. It unlocked their graciousness. And being able to do that, it was like a trigger. I had no idea that people wanted to help me. I had no idea that that was within them. But once I did that, once I said, can you help? It was like a lift of something off their shoulders because they got to do something. And once they got to do something, they felt as though they were serving me. And once they started to serve me, then everything for them started to be just, there was no errors, we didn't have issues. We were so much more freedom in our conversations because that initial servantship had been unlocked. So tell me, what is your unique value prop? You know, as a speaker, I had to have one. I remember my wife Connie asking me, you know, so early on when I started the speaking career, she said, "So what's your thing?" I said, "Well, I don't know. This whole I thing, it might be something there." What's important for us all to understand is that's not what makes me unique. What makes me unique is my willingness to share my story. Now, granted, people may think that, you know, the I is one of the first things they would think of, but what makes me unique is my willingness to share my story with other people, to have a lasting impact on their lives, and to help them to understand what makes them unique. That is why I always want to make sure that people understand that, because it's not what you expect. So all this led up to Winking with Wagner. And as I winked with Wagner, and yes, when I would go to conferences, I would encourage people to stand and wink with me. You know, whether it be the night before at the board of directors meeting or at the conference themselves, I would encourage people to wink with me. And when they did, I would encourage them to understand what makes them unique. Because if this guy, meaning me, knows what makes him unique, and it's not his eye, I wonder what makes me unique. So this is one of the first pictures of somebody that winked with me. And then it went on from there. My old buddy Jack, he winked with me. And then Natalie, she winked. And it started a whole process, a whole challenge, if you will. It was a movement. It was awesome. And then I've had customers wink with me. Even people that I've been on vacation with winked with me. And then I went to see my mom one day. And I took her favorite blizzard. Heath, by the way. And I said, "Mom, could you take a picture with me?" So I handed the picture to my sister, Marlene, and, I said, take a picture. And so we did. So I looked at the picture afterwards. I said, Mom, what are you doing? She said, I'm winking. I thought that's what everyone was supposed to do. So even at the age of 91, my mom still winks with Wagner. I love it. She loves what I'm doing, and I love having her with me. So, we've all talked about this quite a few times. What is it that makes you unique? I can hear it now. Brian, there's nothing special about me. Brian, you don't realize, I lead a pretty simple life. Brian, and this is from clients that I've had in the past, where, we go into these conversations where we talk about what makes them unique, and we talk about how they can unlock that. And we have great conversations in that regard. But there's always that hesitancy. So we have to talk about their story. We have to understand each other's story and really get all those barriers broken down. As we do that, we start to understand there's something in there. And I love it. This is probably one of the second greatest things that I love about my job, is seeing that light bulb go off in different people when they discover what makes them unique. Because once they do, they can then learn how to serve someone else with that. And then the pandemic hit. Yes, I said it. The pandemic hit, and we had to go with winking without Wagner, because there was too many times where we would go to conferences, and actually we would do conferences virtually, and there would never be a time where I would be able to be with people. So I've spent the last year and a half in my basement working with people from a remote distance. Getting to do that with people, they start to understand what makes them unique. That's great. But then also having that conversation with them about how they can serve other people, that's the best. So that's, like I told you, that's my second favorite part of this job. Well, my first most favorite part of the job is being able to encourage people that are different from me. I want you to be able to do that as well. How do you encourage people that are different from you? Well, this book that I wrote, it's called Sometimes It Does Take a Brain Surgeon. It was based on my story of having brain surgery. It was originally written for my kids. I wanted them to know who their dad was in case something were to happen to me. And then eventually their kids, my grandkids, I may never meet. But I wanted to be able to have a book that they could refer to and understand, this is who your dad was. This is who my grandpa was. It just gives me chills just thinking about it. So, yes, like I said, the book started there, but it became more than that. So it became this mantra for me to be able to help other people to understand why they're different and how they can encourage someone else that's different from them. So, let me ask you, who here wants to share a wink with me? You can do this actually you can get my book by sending me an email at brian@aradicalvision.com, and that's ARADICAL. You see the name there. But same thing with the wink. If you would do me a favor and wink with me or wink without me, and put that picture you can put it in your timeline, or you can actually just send me the note and send it to the same email address. I would appreciate that. I love having those pictures. I love seeing those pictures and being able to help people to understand that. So at this time, I would like to ask for you to pull out your wink workbooks. No, you're not missing anything. I didn't give them to you yet. So what you can do is pull out your wink workbooks by going to aradicalvision.com/wink. And there you'll get more information. You'll find out about this wink workbook and what you can get from it. So the wink is really an acronym, and the acronym stands for, the W stands for why. And yes, it's a little odd to have a W or one letter stand for another letter. W stands for why. Anyway, so why is it important to know what makes you unique? The I, we talk about the I a lot. Yes, we talk about the I a lot. But the I is for intentionality and being intentional with what makes you unique. So if what makes you unique is you really want to lose weight, you really want to get more healthy, you really want to have a better relationship with your son or daughter, you really want to have a better relationship with your spouse, whatever that is. So that's the why. But then there's always something that gets in the way. There's always something, whether it's if you're trying to lose weight, French fries, for me, get in the way. They get in the way of me losing weight because I know that's not healthy. But now, there's other things that get in the way. Maybe it's if I'm having this relationship with, wanting to have a better relationship with my spouse or with my kids. Well, there's always technology that gets in the way. There's games, or there's an iPad or a phone that gets in the way. So how do we get away from? How do we limit those things? How do we understand what those things are, and then be intentional with keeping them out of the way? You can't just do that unilaterally. You have to make sure you have these conversations with those people and allow you to have a better conversation. So that's why the I, and yes, we'll talk a little bit more about why it's important to know what makes you unique. So knowing what makes you unique, you have to first think about what do you want to get. So what do you want to get from today? Who are you? Who are you? Are you a person that really wants to do better with that? Is that something for you? For me, it's positivity. I love to be positive. I love to make sure that I stay positive no matter what I do. That's important to me. So what is your goal? What do you want for your life? And why is it important to you? Like I said, there's always something that gets in the way. Usually there's something that gets in the way of you being able to do that. So write down in that book what those things are for you. List them out. Name them. And once you name them, you have so much more power over them. That's important for us all to understand what gets in the way. So what can you start doing today to help you with that goal? What can you stop doing today? Knowing that one of those things may cause you to have some intentionality, it may cause you to understand, that thing that you're doing is what's getting in the way. And then what can you do differently? How can you handle your life differently in order to have a bit different experience? Much like the old saying goes, if you keep getting what you get, you're going to keep getting what you get as long as you keep doing what you do. Something like that. There's a better saying to that, but you know what I mean. Anyway, the N is for a new way of thinking, a new way of looking at life. So for me, like I said, I want to make sure that I'm being positive, but at the same time, I had this office. With this office, I had about 100 square feet, and I wanted to do something different. I wanted to be able to have a new office. So I went upstairs, with my tape measure in hand, and I went walking around the house upstairs in the first floor, and my wife looks at me and she's like, "What are you doing?" I said, "Well, you know what? I've got a 100 square foot office, and I would really like to have a new one. So I think I'm going to move my office up here." She says, "Why?" I said, "Because I need to have a better office. I want to be able to do more with it." She said, "Well, why don't you just use the 300 square foot spot, which is on the other side of the wall?" I'm like, so the kids are moved out. Nobody's using this space anymore. Huh. I never thought of that. That's a great idea. Why didn't I think of that? Well, I had a new way of thinking, a new way of looking at life because I listened to my spouse. Now, it doesn't mean you have to listen to your spouse all the time, although you should. But understand that people can help you with that new way of thinking. So what makes you uniquely qualified for your intended goal? Think about that and answer that question in your mind. What do you see as your strength? And what do you see as your weakness? That again is going to help you to understand how you can approach things new. How can you approach things differently? How could your weakness be viewed as a strength? We've been talking a lot about that over the last hour here in terms of understanding that uniqueness and how you can leverage that uniqueness to serve someone else. The K, you can't have the win, the W-I-N. How about that? You can't have the win and the wink without the K. And the K is for kinesthetic. Yeah, it's a fancy way of saying action, to take action. Do something with that. There's so much you have to offer. And you can do something with it even though you don't know what that is. So, why is it important? I is for intentionality. The N is for a new way of looking at life. And then the K is for kinesthetic. What gets in the way? See, I'm having that speech impediment problem. What gets in the way of that thing you want to do, that purpose? What's the obstacle? So what action can you take today to move toward your goal 1% better? What physical action will you take today to cement the win? I have all these medical issues going on. I have the shunt that drains fluid from my brain to my abdomen. I still have it today. I have my whole right side of my face is numb, and my tongue is numb. My eyes obviously don't work the way they're supposed to. My right side of my body is numb. That's how I live every day. But all that to me is a blessing. So you may think, Brian, come on. How can that be a blessing? It's a blessing because I consider it now an advantage. That advantage has allowed me to be able to embrace this and understand that I have something that no one else has. I have something. And that something means something to somebody else. It encourages other people. That's why I do this. I hate that saying. That's why I do this. And that's one of those things that I need to get my I out of the way. I don't want to be that person that says, that's why I do this. That's not what I'm here for. I'm here to help others. If we can get past the I, get my I out of the way, I'd be so much better off. As I said, my true calling came in the form of being a speaker. You know, growing up, my dad, he loved a speaker. I was fortunate enough to speak at my high school graduation, but there are 3 of my nephews that have also spoken at high school graduations after me, and that always brought tears to my dad's eyes. He loved hearing a great speaker. One of the greatest speakers that he had, that he loved to hear all the time, was Jerry Clower. Jerry Clower was a great storyteller from Mississippi. And he would go to the National FFA convention, and he would hear my dad would hear Jerry talk. And he would love to hear that all the time, so he actually bought a record, and we would listen to it in our basement. And hear the stories that Jerry Cloud would tell. My dad also loved to hear about different presidents that was spoken and find out how much they made for giving a speech. Looking back on it, it was my dad that inspired me to speak. Well, my dad was a public speaker. Well, he wasn't a public speaker, but he spoke in public. He read the scripture at church every Sunday. You know, I was always impressed with the way that he actually practiced his speech. He practiced reading through those scriptures. That has inspired me to do so much better with my practice and what it is that I do. So tell me, have you found your true calling? Is it a burden, or is it something you wake up knowing that you want to be able to do something with that? The other thing that I've learned through this process is that my relationships have become deeper. Connie and I, we spend a lot of time together. Like I said, I'm here at the house every day, and Connie is here when she's not at work, and she always sees me. I don't go anywhere, but those relationships with each other have grown so much deeper than what we've ever had before. Now, she's actually threatened to get a second job. I don't know if that's because she wanted to get away from me or what it was, but she didn't threaten to get a second job. So understanding that her and I get along so well and we love each other, this process of going through staying at home and being quarantined has just deepened our relationships. So has your relationships changed? Business or otherwise? How have they gotten better? Tell me about that. I'd love to hear about that. And then I've become a role model. And there's so many different things that I've learned through this process. So being a role model for my kids is something that I really never thought much of. I never really thought I would be considered a role model to anybody because, I'm me. So the fact that I can be a role model to them is great because they see what I've gone through, and then they see where I am, what I'm doing with that. And I think they're impressed. Well, I hope they're impressed. So I want to ask you, what are you conveying? Are you conveying what you want? Are you conveying your role model? So people see what you're doing, and they see the success you have, and they put two and two together. So are you conveying what you want? I've learned when to step away. There are too many times that I hear or see, well, actually I hear or I feel things that are about to happen, and I know when to back away. Well, one of those things that I back away from is driving. Wow. It may sound simple, but it's not. It's really easy to pick up those car keys, and walk out the door. Have you had to have those conversations with your parents or maybe your grandparents about maybe it's time to stop driving? Maybe you need to slow down a little bit. It's hard for them to accept, but once they do accept that, then things will become much simpler. We've started to look for different places to live because I don't need to have a car. I don't want to have a car. I don't want to be able to drive. I don't want to have that urge. So if I can have everything right next to me, that's really what I'd like to be able to do. So tell me, what are some changes that you need to make, that you're fighting? We all have something. I've also learned how to look at the bigger picture. I see things for a long number of years as opposed to just my here and now. So like I told you, I was in IT sales before, and growing up at IBM and working at IBM for almost 10 years, you could never see past the current quarter that you were in. So I've now learned to look beyond quarters and years. I've learned to look beyond those years and then to know how I'm having an impact is huge, but I want to make sure that I'm having an impact for the long run. And that's why it's so important for us all to understand that we need to slow down and look at the bigger picture. And understand that looking at the bigger picture means sometimes celebrating those little victories. There's little victories along the way that will allow us to get to that bigger picture. I'll never forget one of my first speaking engagements, where I went out and I spoke with people. Wow, that was invigorating. I had a chance to share my story with other people and to have an impact on their lives. I never thought I'd be able to do that. So I celebrated that little victory, but it was all a part of the bigger picture. I told you a little bit about my friend that focuses on what brings her joy. She's also the friend that encouraged me to have deep conversations. Those deep conversations go well beyond just here, the small talk with how are your kids and how's mom and dad, all this. They've really come to a point where how do you become 1% better? If you can focus on what makes you 1% better, you're going to be able to get better. Get better by knowing your vision and focusing on that. That'll make all the difference in the world. I'm so looking forward to you having deep conversations and maybe even having deep conversations with you. So, in order to do that, you sometimes have to just have to sit and be quiet. So what are you doing to sit with your thoughts? I've learned that it's more than just me. The decisions that I pursue have an effect on everyone. Everyone around me knows my passion, they knows what I'm doing, but sometimes I come up with different ideas of how I can serve people. All that affects other people. And if I were to choose to get in the car and drive, that affects other people. I want to make sure that I'm having a limited impact on them from a negative perspective. So yes, I don't drive. There's also things that I need to do that has that effect. So the speaking career has an effect on other people. There have been many times where we've gone and borrowed money from our 401k, or we borrowed money from places we didn't even think we had. We've sold cars we didn't need anymore. We've we sold life insurance policies. So I understand that this has an effect on everyone. Success doesn't reveal you, or success. How do I want to say it? Success doesn't make you. Success reveals you. So success is something we're never going to get to. I don't think. I'm going to keep working as hard as I can, but I hope it doesn't change the person that I am. So what is going to happen when you feel as though you have success? When you feel as though you have success, what's going to happen? I've had to deal with my illness head on. There's never been a time where I just let something happen that I thought was going to happen. I always wanted to take action. That's a part of that kinesthetic. I took action with the prognosis that I was given. The doctors told me that if I wanted to have surgery, I didn't have to have surgery. I didn't have to go to Phoenix, Arizona. But I knew that my problems were going to get worse and more frequent. Well, I knew I needed to take action because I knew I needed to serve my family. I needed to be there for my family. So I took action. I've dealt with my illness head on. Are there things that you're taking the necessary risks? So someone might say that me going to have brain surgery was a risk. It probably was. But understanding that risk was what I needed to do in order to get better, I had no problem with it. I've learned to start anew. So being in IT sales and being an IT sales guy, working at IBM and companies like IBM, I realized that that's not who I was anymore. I realized, because of the promise that I made, I realized that I had someone else to serve. And that's what I've been doing for the last 5 years, is trying to help them in any way that I can. Now, starting new has been hard. Like I said, there have been many instances where we've had to sacrifice things, but I see the long-term picture. I see the bigger picture, and my wife does as well. So we want to make sure that we continue to serve people in this way. There's many times that I've had to go back to old relationships there, and we've had to have conversations with people and to ask for help. And those old relationships have proved very fruitful for both of us. To be able to have those has been extremely helpful. So let me ask you, how are you staying in touch with your old relationships? Because they'll prove to be beneficial going forward. And then not finally, I have many, many things I've learned. Another thing that I've learned is that I have something to say. I have something to share with people. And I want to help them to embrace their own personal blindness to achieve greater vision for their lives. So what's your vision? I've stepped into a leadership role. This leadership role, believe it or not, back in 2000, I joined the board of directors for a local non-for-profit. Actually, it was my church. And I served on that board for 6 years. In those 6 years, I became president. Why did they want me to be president? I think it was nobody else wanted the job, but really, I think it was more than that. I had a passion for leadership. I wanted to be able to help to continue on with that church in that way. Fast forward to 2021, and I am now on the board of directors for the National Speakers Association. And with that role, I've now become the president. As the president, again, it's a job probably nobody else wanted. That's not true. It's a job a lot of people want. But it's a job that really is so fulfilling because the National Speakers Association, NSA, we'll say NSA. NSA has been phenomenal because that group of people is one of the best groups that I've ever ran across. They're so philanthropic and so caring and so intelligent and so giving with what they have and what they can leverage to be able to help other people. And they've helped me a long way in that regard. The outside doesn't matter. I've learned that. I've always been pretty vain. So you can ask my mom about that. I always cared about how I looked. And she would say, "Oh, Brian, you look fine." Who wants to look fine? Nobody. So I would always have an issue with that. But now I realize that this is who I am. I mean, yes, I don't look normal. There's nothing about me that looks normal. But people recognize me and people know what I've been through. And they see how that it matters what's on the inside more than anything. And I'm getting to a point where I'm more comfortable with that, over the last 10 years plus, and being able to do this and to be able to help other people with that. It's made me understand that really the outside is just a shell. It's just a casing for the person you really are. So how do you see yourself? If you see yourself as a 2, someone else will never view you as a 10. You have to view yourself as a 10 or at least an 8 in order for you to be able to be seen as 8 or less. You'll never get to a higher level than what you view yourself as. That's why it's so important to have that self-care. My memories, and this item that I learned is it's interesting. I'm not really sure how to handle that, but my memories are singular. So recent memory stuff, I see in double. I see everything in double. Because my right eye is a little bit open and there's a little bit of light coming out, and so I see my hands down here, but not other than that. Not much other than that. Well, my memories of things, I don't see that double. I don't see that because I don't think that's how my brain wants to remember. My brain wants to remember things in singular vision, the way they should be. Isn't that interesting? Isn't that interesting? You may have heard the story about the local high school wrestler. They said he had an unfair advantage. And he made it to the state wrestling tournament. I mean, with an unfair advantage. It's really confusing, but listen to the story. So, he had autism. And he had a coach that would go with him no matter where he went around the mat. And told him what to do. And then he was blind. He was blind. So the coach also helped him by making sure that he was touching the other wrestler. The other wrestler had to be touching him the entire time, or Caden would have no idea where he was. I first met Caden back before I even started at the School for the Blind. At the School for the Blind, he walked into the room and I was the only one in there, and I'm like, I didn't say anything. I didn't want to scare him. I wasn't sure what to do, and he was looking for his cane, obviously. So he just went around and finally found it, but I didn't know what to do. I wasn't sure how to handle the whole situation. So it was very, very strange because I wasn't used to that. Well, Caden had an unfair advantage because of all those things. But I don't really think he did have an unfair advantage. Do you think he did? He didn't have an unfair advantage. Well, he did, but he had an unfair advantage for a different reason. The reason why he had that unfair advantage was because he saw the world differently than you and I do. He saw the world in a much more clear way. He sees people for what they are, for who they are. He sees right through them because there's something about not having that visual confrontation or visual display that allows you to be able to hear people's words so much better. So what do you think? Do you think he had an unfair advantage? Another thing that I've learned how to unlock my creativity. I never thought that I would be able to do this. I never thought that I would stand in front of a camera. I never thought that I would stand in front of an audience. I mean, all this, and for me to be able to tell people about my story and to have an impact on their lives, I never thought I'd be able to do that. But that creativity comes from knowing who I am, knowing my story, and knowing what I have. I didn't make something up that's not new. I'm telling how I've done what I've done. I'm telling how I've been able to remain positive, how I've been able to be awesome. All that is a part of creativity, but it's not. It's really who I am. And that's been important for me to be able to share that story with other people. So what do you need to learn? What is it about you that you haven't really faced yet? How can you leverage what you do? How can you leverage what makes you unique? Another thing that I've learned is that people on the phone don't know I can't see. They don't know, that I have a visual impairment. They don't realize that, sometimes I have a speech impediment. Maybe you don't realize I have a speech impediment. And they don't realize that I have numbness. So I'm just a person to them. And that's all I want to be. I just want to be a person. And if I can understand how I can serve them and how they can, be a part of my life, then I want to be able to do that. It doesn't matter what I can see. So what are you hiding? What is it about you that other people can't see, but you really should let them know about? This is funny. I don't do this every time I'm on the phone with a customer service rep, but there are times where I'm just extra nice to them. You're the nicest rep I've talked to today. You've been so helpful. Thank you very much. Now, being mean to them or being agitated or being disgruntled with them, it doesn't do any good. It has no positive effect on that relationship at all. It actually probably gets you worse customer service. But think about them as a person. They're just people. They're not the company. Yes, they represent the company, but they're not the company. So why give them a hard time? Why give them an earful when they don't deserve it? Just be nice to them, and you'll have a better day yourself. Wish good things on good people. That's something or wish good things on people you don't like. Wow, that's hard. There are people that I don't like. I can't stand being around them at times because I just feel as though they're out to get something, or they're too weird, you know. And maybe I feel awkward. I don't know what it is, but there are people that I don't like. I'm sure there are people you don't like. So what if you wish something good for them? If you do that, you're going to release them. You're not going to hate them anymore. You're not going to be angry at them. You're not going to be fearful of them. If you wish something good for them, you'll release them. And you'll release yourself. Try not to assign motives to other people's actions. You know, a good friend of mine told me that one time about 10, 15 years ago, and I've never forgotten it. This is my old buddy Rye. And Rye is a great guy, and he understands so much about how to treat other people. But we all need to understand that we don't know what the motives are for other people. We don't know why they did the certain things that hurt us. If we can not assign motives to those actions, then we'll just be, again, much more free than we ever have been. So try to do that, if you will. It's been great being with you here today. I'll tell you, there are a number of people here that are in management, and understand that those people in management, it would be helpful if you knew how to encourage people that are different from you. If we can all understand what makes us unique, then we'll know how to leverage that. But how do you encourage people that are different from you? So for me, I think of the number of people that I've encountered over the years where, you know, they're a little bit different. I don't know what to do with them all the time, but I've found that if I encourage them to tell me their story, to be able to relate better to them, then I will be able to know how to lead them. That is why it's so important for us all to know this encouragement. And yes, I do have these workshops that I put on where we help people to encourage that, help people to know that, and then we are able to make them or help them to go farther than they've ever thought of before. So tell me, what is the biggest issue that you've faced in your life? I'm gonna give you a few seconds here to think about that. What is the biggest issue you face? For me, it was going blind. Now it's my brain that bleeds from time to time. What is your biggest issue that you faced? Got it? Next. How did you overcome that? Or accept it? You don't always overcome being blind, but you accept that you have limited vision. You don't always overcome having brain bleeds, but you accept that this is something that you're dealing with. You don't focus on what you don't have. Focus on what you do have. That's been helpful for me. What's been helpful for you? The next question that I'm going to ask is, how can you leverage that to make someone else's life better? Now, leverage that for your good. Or if you're talking about your employees and their issues that they've had, you want to leverage it for their good. That's why we're here, is to make other people's lives better. And you encourage other people. If you can encourage other people and give them a sense of entitlement, that sense of, just encouragement, then they're going to be much happier. They're going to be much more successful. They're going to be much more empowered to do things that you never thought that they could do. Encouraged employees are more engaged. Do you think that's right? I think it's true, but I also think that this can become a blind spot. A blind spot that will prevent you from knowing what you're doing. So sometimes you'll view yourself as doing good by encouraging someone, by saying good job on that assignment, or good job on that paper, or things like that. You may not mean it. If you get to know them and get to understand what it is they're doing and why they're doing it, then you can encourage them as they go along the way, and then celebrate that as a milestone. So sometimes that can become a blind spot. So Brian, you've talked a little bit about all this, and you really want to help us to encourage people that are different from you. What's the process? I wish there was a process. There is no written process for encouraging other people, other than first to know them. You got to know your audience first in order for you to be able to encourage other people. And then there's a process that goes beyond that. But that really depends on what it is that they want from life. Where do they want to be? How are you going to encourage them if you don't know that? So you've got to know them first. So it's at this point, there's one final story that I want to share with you. So don't go away. But while you're there, if you would please, let my mom know how I did, and tell her with this survey. Go to radicalvision.com/survey and fill that out. If you would please, I would really appreciate that. Thank you so much. Now, we're going to take a break for a few minutes. We're going to have a question and answer. So we're not going to take an actual break. We're going to take a question and answer period. And we're going to answer any questions that you have. Before I wrap today, I'd like to share one final story. It's about the knitting club. And there's in the after school program, we have many clubs. We have the yoga club, we have the CrossFit club, and the cooking club. But yes, the knitting club. The knitting club is a great club for us all to experience with so many different things that we've never would have imagined before. The knitting club at the School for the Blind. It brought back my grandma's words, because my grandma would always be knitting when we'd go over there. So grandma would say, Brian, life is going to turn out differently than what you planned. Always be open to reimagining your life. Find what makes you unique and do something with that to make someone else's life better. Grandma was smart. We had to go get supplies. Imagine you're shopping at Joann Fabrics and you see this caravan pull up. You're like, what the? So there was 10 of us. There was 10 visually impaired students going into Joann Fabrics to get our knitting supplies. Well, we arrived in the front right part of the store. And of course, we had to go to the back left, which meant we had to weave our way to the knitting. And just again. So in the knitting club, we had to weave our way to the, yeah, funny, huh? Anyway, thank you for indulging me on that. But once we got there, I was amazed at how the kids, all the students wanted to have a certain color of yarn. Why did it matter? Well, it mattered because they were knitting. Well, so I asked that question. I asked Dee. I said, Dee, why does it matter? Well, she said, because, we're knitting a scarf for our mom. And my mom's favorite color is blue. All right, that's good to know. So everybody else had a similar mission. Day 2 of camp, day 2 of the knitting club was a week away. So we got checked out, everything, we paid for everything, which was also quite a challenge, but we got there. You didn't want to be behind us in line. So we got to the knitting club for the second day and the next following week. And so as we're there, we had a number of students that were there, but when I arrived, the students were already knitting. And I walked in, I said to the teacher, the leader of the club, I said, well, what would you like me to do? And she said, well, would you go see friend? Adam is his name. I'm not even sure if Adam is his right name, but that's how we refer to each other, as friend. So I walked up to Adam and I had to go to the back of the room. And when I went to the back of the room, there was all these chairs and the wood covering the walls. And it was just a really, really cool space to be in, because it was the original lobby for the School for the Blind. So I reached Adam in the back of the room and I walked up to him and I said, Adam, how you doing? How are you, friend? He said, man, I'm having a hard time with this. I don't know what's going on, but they want me to use this modified loom and then take this yarn up over top of this one yarn and up over the top of the peg, and then I will have made a loop. All that for one stitch, which is a hard thing for me to do. So I asked him to show me a little bit more about what he was trying to do. And I could see it. It was obvious to me what he needed to do. I mean, I just wanted to do it for him, but that wouldn't really be what the job was for. My job was to teach and lead him. So you can imagine it was frustrating. I just wanted to do it for him. That would have been easier, but it wouldn't have been the right thing. Well, anyway, so he's messing with this, and he's got the hook out, and he gets the yarn from the bottom, and he gets over the top, and he gets over the top of the peg, and he does it. I said, friend, you did it. I did it? I did it. I did it. I made a loop. I made a loopy. Just then, someone from the front left corner of the room heard him say it. He made a loopy, loopy, loopy. Then over here, and then over here, then over here. The entire room started in with loopy, loopy, loopy. It was phenomenal. You can imagine the feeling of success for Adam, but you can imagine the feeling of success for that entire group, that entire club, because that's what he knitted. You can imagine his mother's surprise for Mother's Day when she opened her gift. It was a scarf, and it was blue. What are your key life experiences? Where has your life turned out differently than what you planned? Be an encourager. Share your story. Write your letter. I'm Brian with one eye. Now go be awesome.